Very good, everybody. Well, I am so glad to be with you today. And the exciting thing for me is that BGU, even as it's changed over the years from when I was the global DMIN and DTL director, has retained its core commitment to the principle that business is ministry. And that's really important for us. I direct the Center for Community Transformation at Fresno Pacific University. And really it's a community benefit organization founded on all of the Baki principles. That followed a career in InterVarsity as their global urban project director, the national urban project director. Leading urban projects in 30 cities around the US, founder of a local institute, Fresno Institute for Urban Leadership, helping expose college students to urban mission. Then I was, of course, with Baki, and then during the global economic downturn, Baki thought it might close, it might not make it. And so Fresno Pacific found I might be available and asked if I would start a center, which I did 9 years ago. But it was really coming off of the heels of this remarkable experience of following Ray Baki around the world. And when you do that, you meet the people he knows, you meet global influence. It just so happened that during that time, I was asked on to the advisory council of our local mayor in Fresno, California, the 5th largest city in California. And Fresno is a city with the second highest rate of concentrated poverty of any large city in the United States, second only to McAllen, Texas. Concentrated poverty is any neighborhood that lives where 40% or more of the residents live under the federal poverty line, and Fresno has a higher incidence of those kinds of neighborhoods than any other large city in the US except McAllen. So during that time, the mayor, who is a Christ-following, just one of the most brilliant leaders I've ever met, she invited faith leaders together, got them in a room, and asked a very provocative question. I was in the room. The question she asked was, what do you think the role of the church is in the economic well-being of a city? And I looked around and, pastors, faith leaders, there was nothing but blank stares. They don't know how to answer that question. Ask them about the spiritual needs of a city. Ask them about the social needs of the city. Some of them, at least, could talk about those. Others are clueless about those. But ask about the economic needs of the city. It just wasn't in their wheelhouse. They were trained in seminaries, not in business schools, and they just didn't even understand the question. But the question gets at the root of what is, in the words of one theologian, what is vandalizing shalom in our cities? And that is the need that people have to have shelter, have food, have security, and to live in thanksgiving to God who's providing for them. And so as a result of that, we entered kind of a process. And that process took several years, but in that process, some things began to dawn on us. Like many of us in the room were nonprofit leaders. And, so what's the answer to any social problem? Form another nonprofit, right? Like the world doesn't have enough of those. The problem with that is that our solutions can become the problem themselves. Nonprofits or community benefit organizations, they can become edifices which must be propped up and themselves supported. Right now, there are 1.5 million of them in the US. It's growing 10 times faster than for-profit sector. In California, there are 144,000. It's our state's 4th largest industry. And yet we have not moved the needle on poverty or on homelessness at all. What's wrong with that picture? And the problem with many nonprofits is there's sort of Machiavellian 501c3 principle involved here. Our job is to keep the lights on. And in fact, our job as nonprofit leaders is tied to the existence of the problem. Isn't that a conflict of interest? What if the problem were solved? We'd be all out of jobs. No one likes to talk about that, but it is a reality. And on top of that, philanthropy is changing. What did the new tax law do to community benefit organizations in the US that were dependent on contributions? Well, everybody saw a dip. The new tax law meant there was no more incentive for itemizing your deductions. You're going to get double the deduction, $25,000 a year, without itemizing. There's no more incentive to give. So philanthropy is changing. Nonprofits aren't moving the needle. What are the options? Is there another way? And so with the mayor's question, no, don't get me wrong, folks, I am a nonprofit leader. This is the world I live in and I exist in and have served for the last 40 years of my life. So I'm not bagging on nonprofits. I'm simply saying they cannot be the only approach to the vast social problems we're experiencing in our culture right now. If we think they are, it's as if we're working with one hand tied behind our back. And our problems are so vast, we can't afford to handicap ourselves that way. So what is the other way? Well, we think it is entrepreneurship applied to the common good. Entrepreneurship is, it's a big sophisticated concept, right? And when we think of famous entrepreneurs, we think of Elon Musk with Tesla, or we think of Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation and Apple, et cetera. But entrepreneur is simply a French word. It means one who takes on a project. What's that project? We think that project is Shalom. And what does Shalom look like? Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute. So if an entrepreneur is simply one who takes on a project, what's a social entrepreneur? It's one who takes on the mission of creating and sustaining social value through innovative enterprise, bold action with transparency and accountability to the social fabric and to the planet. In other words, people and planet are at the core of social entrepreneurship. Now, I said that project is Shalom. And this is what faith does. Perry Yoder, Mennonite scholar, also a linguist, he looked at the use of Shalom, that Hebrew word, in the Bible. And Shalom is this amazingly complex word. It takes at least 5 English words to encapsulate what Shalom means. It means safety and security. It means peace. It means reconciliation. It means wholeness and completion. It means all of those things. See how many words I had to use? But he discovered when Shalom is used in the scriptures, it always, without fail, falls in one of 3 categories. Shalom means making things the way they ought to be. Now, he discovered the 3 categories are, every time it's used in the Bible, it either means making things the way they ought to be in people, which means that they should be upright, they should have a moral center and a compass, be people of the truth, not people of the lie, or that it means making things the way they ought to be for people, that they should have safety and security and enough to eat and a place to live. In Genesis, Abraham even asks about the shalom of his cattle. He wants to know if they're secure and if predators are feeding on them and if they have enough grazing land. So making things the way they ought to be for people. And then finally, making things the way they ought to be between people and God, themselves, each other, and the environment. And he's discovered that every time shalom is used in the Bible, and irene as Greek in the New Testament, these are the categories that the scriptures are addressing. Well, I found that that's fascinating. And so the question is, where in our cities is shalom being vandalized in any of these categories? Vandalized in people, It's being vandalized in my neighborhood when a landlord requires that the tenant sleep with him in order to get the heat turned back on. That's the vandalization of shalom in people. Or it's a vandalization of shalom for people when people on the west side have a life expectancy 20 years less than people on the north side of my city. It's a vandalization between people when the haves and the have-nots never relate and don't know each other, or when people escape neighborhoods that are diversifying. So this would be our clue that maybe there's an issue, and maybe we should approach it not just from a let's form another nonprofit kind of perspective, but what if we could approach it from an enterprising entrepreneurship perspective? What is a social enterprise? Well, here's one. It doesn't have to be Tesla. It doesn't have to be Apple. It can be Chaco Hachma. These 5 gals were in a youth group in Montreal, Canada, when Christian Direction, a small nonprofit up there led by Glenn Smith, his wife and daughter, they wanted to teach these gals from a poor neighborhood about money. And they didn't know where money came from, how to make it, what to do with it when they had it. So the leader of the youth group said, maybe we should teach a class. And someone else said, they're not going to learn if you just teach a class. So they said, well, what if we started our own little business? So they ordered some chocolate molds, and frankly, they didn't know what they were getting into. These chocolate molds came, and then they realized, oh, okay, it would be helpful if we knew how to make chocolate. And so they had to investigate, how do you make gourmet chocolate? And then, well, the girls didn't know about sanitation and preparing chocolate for sale, so they had to do that. Then they had to think about packaging, so they had to learn that. Then they had to think about marketing, so they had to learn that. Then they had to learn QuickBooks to learn accounting. Then they had to do an e-commerce setup. And you see all the learning points here. What was the objective? Teach these gals about money, and to do it from a Christ-centered perspective. What was the mechanism? Business was the mechanism. And all along the journey, they talked about the relationship they had with money, the relationship between faith and money, and all the best practices, financial literacy, all of those kinds of things. And then these gals sold the money, or sold the chocolate. They ended up with between $400 and $600 in their pockets that summer, and none of them were banked. So now they're banked. You see all along the way, the mission objectives being accomplished by enterprise. And it was a self-sustaining deal. It was one of the first social enterprises we'd met that were church-based or CBO-based. And guess what? They're still in operation 10 years later. It's awesome. Small is beautiful, folks. Small is beautiful. We believe that. And I'll tell you more about that in a bit when we talk about our ecosystem here. That's Chaco Hachma. What we've found is that there are 3 social enterprise types. And this was with the help of Alex Nichols from the Skoll Center in Oxford, in England. So there are some social enterprise models that are, we call them embedded, where the activity of the enterprise is actually the mission. So here in Fresno, Community Music School started to teach poor kids music when school districts were closing down music programs because of funding budget cuts. Some professors at Fresno Pacific University said, no, we're gonna teach, we're gonna do summer music camps and all sorts of fun music stuff for kids, private instruction, all of that. Then they found that school districts would actually pay them to do this because it was less expensive to the district. And so poor kids are getting music taught to them. The activity is the mission. That is the mission. And the fees from the districts pay for the mission. Second example is called external model. And this is where the activity of the business supports the mission. It is not the mission, but it supports it. So Lana Coffee here in Fresno, they buy coffee beans from farmers in northern Thailand that used to grow opium. They convinced them to sell coffee instead. So they ripped the opium out, planted coffee, and now they're buying coffee from them. They roast it here in Fresno. They sell it here in Fresno. They're in all the best stores, Whole Foods and Safeway, et cetera. And then they return 25% of their profits to the hill tribes in northern Thailand. And with those profits, dig clean water wells. So their motto is clean water with every cup. And that's their mission. Now, they could be selling tennis rackets. They could be selling golf balls or ping pong balls. You know, they're selling coffee. But it's this virtual circle, no longer growing opium. That's a win. They're selling or they're buying a product from these farmers. So the farmers have a living. That's a win. They're roasting and selling this great coffee in Fresno. That's a win for the customers. They're returning 25% of the profits to dig clean water wells in a virtuous circle back to Thailand. At every level, this is good and accomplishing mission. Good for the environment, good for people, good for the social fabric as drugs have been reduced. That's an external model. Final model is an integrated model where the activity actually overlaps the mission. And one example of that would be rock pile landscaping. And, you know, it just occurs to me, let me see if I'm going to end this show here. And I think I might have picked, where did my picture of Jeremy go? Oh, I forgot to tell you about Jeremy. Let me go back. So when I was talking about Shalom, this little redheaded kid, his name is Jeremy, and he showed up one summer at North Fresno Church. It's a Mennonite Brethren church, and they were doing a summer program, and he got to know Pastor Lauren and just soaking up male companionship. One day, he brings this older guy who's wearing the Indiana 7 shirt to the church and said, Pastor Lauren, this is my dad. His name's Jeremy too. And so pretty soon, the older Jeremy takes Pastor Lauren aside and says, hey, Pastor, I just got out of jail. Can you help me find a job? Well, North Fresno Church just started that year a water-wise landscaping company called Rockpile Yard Service. And so he said, sure, come to work for us. It was started with men just like Jeremy in mind, with coming out of prison. So he worked for the first 2 weeks, got his first paycheck and looked at this thing and he said, what am I supposed to do with this? Never gotten a paycheck before, in his 30s. And so Lauren said, well, you take it to the bank. And he said, I don't have a bank. So Lauren got him set up at the local Wells Fargo. And 3 days later, a much older man shows up at the church, not in this picture. And he's saying to the secretary, where's this Pastor Lauren? Where's this Pastor Lauren? What's going on here? And so they get Pastor Lauren and he says, what's going on here? And Pastor Lauren says, well, what do you mean? And this guy says, well, my son, Jeremy, just got out of prison. And every other time he's been released, he's reoffended in like within 3 days. But this time he has a job and a bank account and money in the bank. What's going on here? And suddenly now you have 3 generations in one family going to North Fresno Church. Economic solutions provide social solutions. Economic solutions contribute to the well-being, the shalom of a family. And when that's true for Jeremy, it's true for these young girls in Chaco Hachma, and it's true for those who participate in this integrated approach. So these are the 3 general types of social enterprise that we see and we've helped to cultivate here. But let me read you a biblical passage, because I think, you know, as Ray used to like to say, we need to outbind Bible, the fundamentalists. And he was saying that because, when we're talking about this, and Marlene and I were talking about this at the end of last session, that this can be a tough sell for some communities. The issue of, is this, the purview of the church or not? Is starting a business really something churches ought to be thinking about? It can be a tough sell. And we need to understand how deeply embedded this is in the scriptures. So let me read 2 Kings chapter 4 to you. This is Elisha and the widow's oil. Now the wife of a member of the company of prophets cried to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord. But a creditor has come to take my children, my 2 children, as slaves." Let me just stop there for a second. This is a typical situation in the ancient world. Even though this woman was married to a man of prestige, the moment he died, if he had debts, creditors came and they were going to take her kids. This is a catastrophe in the making. Can you imagine this woman's panic? So she comes to Elisha, and Elisha says to her, "What shall I do for you?" In other words, what do you want? What do you want me to do? He's asking her to declare to him what she needs. So she gets to define her problem. I think that's really important. And then he says, "Tell me, what do you have in the house?" And she answered, "Your servant has nothing in the house, well, except a jar of oil." He said, "Go outside, borrow vessels from all your neighbors, empty vessels, and not just a few. Then go in and shut the door behind you and your children. Start pouring into all these vessels. When each is full, set it aside." So she left him and shut the door behind her and her children. They kept bringing vessels to her, and she kept pouring. When the vessels were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another vessel." But he said to her, "There are no more." Then the oil stopped flowing. She came and told the man of God, and he said, "Go sell the oil and pay your debts. You and your children can live on the rest." Right, so what was happening here? Well, you've got several players. You got the woman who's got a problem, got a social problem. And certainly women in my neighborhood and the highest crime, highest poverty neighborhood of the city of Fresno can identify with losing their children to drugs, losing their children to gangs, having their children taken from them because you're deemed an unfit mother. All sorts of ways that people in my neighborhood can identify with this. Then you've got Elisha, who's bringing some leadership to the situation. Then you've got the neighbors, right, who do something small. They contribute 1 vessel each. You've got her sons who are helping in the process. You've got the oil, and remember, the woman didn't think she had anything, but Elisha he's taking an asset inventory, right? He wants to know what they have to work with. And then, you've got God, who does the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000, basically, again. Right? You've got the prophet addressing a social problem, utilizing current assets, involving a community, including stakeholders and leaders. There's human energy and there's God's intervention. It combines short-term relief and long-term sustainable solutions. This last line, "Go sell the oil, pay your debts, and you and your children can live on the rest." It's a financial solution to a social problem. Economics is at the core of most social problems, and most church leaders don't recognize it. Ray Bakke has looked at this passage and he said, "You know what? I think it's very possible that if this woman invests some of her profits, she can become the oil seller for the village, and that what Elisha did was set her up in a little cottage industry." I think that's pretty cool. A financial solution to a social problem. This is at the core of what we think social enterprise is. Now, this is, again, it's nothing new. Saint Basil, my patron saint of social enterprise, in the 4th century, he was wealthy, the son of wealthy parents. came to Christ, started giving his money to the poor, but soon realized his money was going to be gone and he'd still have the poor there. So he said, I got to do something different. And he trained his monks, therefore, in blacksmithing, in carpentry, and other trades to support the hospitals that he was starting, the orphanages, and the rehab centers for women coming out of prostitution. This is business as mission, as Gaya Gort would talk about. This is leadership that says our ministry has to be self-sustaining, and business is another way of accomplishing the mission that we care about, rescuing people from exploitation, liberating people. It's Paul and the slave girl in Philippi again, liberating people from their bondage. They even named a city after St. Basil, Basiliad. And Ray and I stood in Cappadocia and looked at the monasteries that he and many of the other early saints created, carving out of the limestone these amazing chapels. So Amy Minnick is an investor who raises impact investing. And she says, basically, if you look at the business spectrum, this is what it looks like. We'll start on the right-hand side here. You've got traditional CBOs or nonprofits. These are donation-funded charities. Their focus is solely on their mission, and they're funded only with donations. On the far left, you've got traditional businesses. These are businesses with a profit motive only. They maximize their shareholder returns regardless of the effects on employees, the environment, or the community. These are polar opposites. But you have kind of a movement toward the middle, and the middle is the sweet spot for those who want to invest in companies that are trying to have a social mission. So still in the brown section, you've got what she calls a charity enterprise, second from the right. This is a charity, but with a revenue model to fund and carry out its mission. They're still nonprofits. It could be a church, it could be a nonprofit, but at least they've got a business component to them, and they're generating revenue through selling something. This is not just a bake sale at church, raising money for the youth group. It's something more than that, but it's still not really primarily a business. When you hop over into the green section, she has what she calls an impact company. And this is very close to what we would call social enterprise. And an impact company is a business that seeks a positive social and spiritual impact along with financial profit. And the way we put it is a little different. We say a social enterprise is a business that manages and measures for impact and sustainability. You manage for social impact and you manage for financial stability. You measure your social impact. It's no good just telling stories, anecdotal stories of how great, somebody responded to your little business idea. How did they respond? How many are responding? How well are we doing at that? We got to measure what we do. And then we've got to measure the financial sustainability factor as well. Make sure that we're a sustainable business. She goes on to talk about the tithing business. This is just the Christian owner who's, they're running a regular business basically, but they give 10% of all their profits to something. And that is not a social enterprise. And that's basically what we all should be doing with whatever we do. A social enterprise is really wrapped around a particular social purpose that often is really meaningful to the owner or the leader of the enterprise. It's the victim of human trafficking that now leads Thistle, which is, an amazing organization employing women. They make Bath and Body Works type products, but it's because they had personal experience with sexual exploitation. that kind of thing, or the gang member that starts a gangs to jobs ministry and then realizes that they're really a temp agency that can place guys with companies that are willing to give them a second chance, and it's a revenue model. So they often have a passion for it. Okay, I find that spectrum really helpful. Here's a book written by Amy Minnick, Profitable Charity, another book on the social entrepreneur that I find helpful. Both of these are very short and very interesting, and we'll be sure you get those. Why do I care about this? Again, because my city has 45 concentrated poverty communities where 40% or more of the population lives at or below the federal poverty line. We have an unemployment rate that's twice the national average, sometimes 3 times. We have a larger number of persons re-entering society after incarceration per capita than anywhere else in the state of California. We have more than 100,000 children waking up poor every day in my city. And that is just not acceptable. What do you think God thinks about that? That we have gotten used to the idea that in our city, 100,000 children wake up poor every day. More Fresno context, we suffer from a lack of educational attainment. We have substandard housing. There's food insecurity. What an irony. Fresno County serves the nation. We are responsible for 80% of all fruits and nuts that the nation eats. 80%. And that 100,000 children wake up in our city poor, some of them going hungry. In the region that feeds the world. It's just too much to bear sometimes. We care about this. So I told you a little bit of Ashley Swearingen, our mayor. She asked that provocative question. Out of that came a book that we wrote called The Work of Our Hands, where we explored models around the country. And out of that came a summit, an annual summit for about 5 years that explored social enterprise models. And that began a process for us that we started. So the first part of that process was to offer a social business plan workshop. I'm telling you this because this webinar is all about how to create an ecosystem in your city that supports holistic financial healing for people on the margins and accomplishes poverty alleviation in a way that moves the needle. So step 1, social business plan workshops. We take 30 or 40 people through this per year. Some of them are individual entrepreneurs who want to start a social business. Others are churches, others are nonprofits. They want a revenue model. They want to accomplish mission, but in a way that's sustainable. They got people coming to them, asking them for work. They don't know where to send them, so they want to start a business to employ them. And they learn how to write a business plan here and how to create a business model. Then we ask them to pitch, some of them, if they're decent, to a panel of experts, business leaders. It's like the Shark Tank is, but we call ours the Spark Tank because we don't like sharks. We don't take any equity. We are the sharks without teeth. And so they pitch in what's called the Spark Tank. It's a social enterprise pitch fest. Awards are made anywhere from $500 to $7,500. I think this year there was a $12,000 award. I think this year had 4 or 5 awardees. And then anybody who wins a Spark Tank Award, we send them on to our Social Enterprise Academy, which is 2 months from zero to operational in 2 months with their business permit. And it's a chance to iterate and pivot and refine, and they get a business coach and a mentor. It's really exciting to see. All sorts of businesses have been started up as a result. We've had more than 260 people employed, many with barriers, a success rate double the national average, more than $100,000 in startup awards granted, and nearly $4 million in revenue generated just by 24 of the enterprises. We've started about 48 of them. I say started, we catalyzed, and entrepreneurs started. Here are some of the the companies that we've worked with. Here's a model for a church, a congregational approach. There's a church up in Vancouver, British Columbia, Grandview, and they started 3 small social enterprises. Just Renos, working with men coming out of prison. They renovate properties. It's a little business. And it's kind of a hybrid model. The church does support this as ministry, but the men also generate revenue by getting contracts, and they get paid out of that, and it helps to support the business. They started Just Catering for women coming out of addiction. It's a catering company. They do cakes and other formal catered events. And then Just Potters is a business for men and women with developmental disabilities. A church can do this, and so they do fundraisers, but they also have their regular business, and that works because churches have all sorts of assets, like business people that want to coach and mentor, like a spare room at the back of the hall where somebody can keep their business stuff. People with knowledge to encourage, and there's a customer base to sign up for their services. So it works. It's a congregational approach. And I mentioned our academy, which is every other Saturday for 2 months. We just finished the latest academy and had the graduation. Out of all of our Spark Tank awardees, about 49% have been white, 40% African-American, 12% Hispanic. Pretty well split, male, female, the gender of the entrepreneurs. And we've got the whole spectrum here, 46% active at last count, 13, almost 14% still in the startup phase, 11% never got a start, 6, almost 7% on hold, and 20% failed. They're defunct, no longer operational. It's just the model didn't work, and that's to be expected. So that's the social enterprise part of our ecosystem. But we quickly realize that these things are all tied together. So people who are coming out of prison, or people who are being employed by our social enterprises, other parts of their lives are in disarray. Addiction, incarceration, all of these things just wreak chaos. They wreak havoc with a family's finances. So we partnered with the Chalmers Center in Faith and Finances, and now for 9 years have been the West Coast hub for Chalmers. And we've trained more than 100 local leaders. We just finished last week our current facilitator training. 26 people got certified as Faith and Finances facilitators, representing 15 different Valley churches and community benefit organizations. And an interesting thing happened this last year. The Housing Authority, which is a quasi-federal agency, came to us and said, would you lead Faith and Finances in our Housing Authority complexes? And we said, well, yes, but you do know we're a faith-based organization, right? And this is faith-based curriculum. And they said, yeah, faith-based, we work with them all the time, no problem. And we said, well, this is not just faith-based, it's very Jesus-centered. Like Jesus is woven into all of the curriculum. And now the curriculum is all best practice, national vetted best practice curriculum. But we think there's a huge tie between people's moral center and what we learn about money and its impact on relationships. And we found that that's kind of the secret sauce of this program. And they said something we will never forget. They said, well, it's interesting. When we offer financial literacy stuff, nobody comes. And we realized that a lot of people living in our housing authority complexes are people of faith that come from the Christian tradition. And we were wondering maybe if that's what we were missing. We about fell off our chairs, folks. This is a federal agency saying that Jesus was the thing that was missing. And so we said, yes, we'll do it. And so we've done a number of these now. The picture you're looking at here is one in action at Cedar Courts, just around the corner from my office here. And the young woman at the end, her name is Maria. we're in that section where they're learning about tracking your expenses, which nobody in these classes has ever done. And she began to weep. And Carlos, who's the young black-haired man in the picture at the far left, he's my associate director. He said, "What's wrong, Maria?" And through her tears, she said, "Well, this last month, I've been tracking my expenses. I've never done it before, but what I learned in this class, I'm doing." And she says, "I realized when I added the numbers up that every day I go get my kids from school and we walk home together. And on the way home, we stop at the corner store and we buy snacks. I did not know this, but we're spending $600 a month on snacks walking home from school. If I had known that 3 years ago, I could have had a down payment on the double wide trailer that I've wanted to live in." The good news is Maria finished the class, began her very first ever savings program. This is a year later now, and she is on her way to being able to afford that double wide trailer because of what she learned. In Fresno, there are more payday lenders than there are McDonald's and Starbucks combined. And that's because payday lenders prey on the poor. They follow the corridors of poverty. Faith and Finances helps to inoculate low and moderate income people against payday lenders and helps them learn best practices, things that you and I take for granted about money. That's part of the ecosystem, having that kind of training available for people who are starting their own businesses, for social enterprise, employees that need to learn about money and their relationship with money, et cetera. Really crucial. But that's not enough either. We realize that institutions can start social enterprises, but there are just some people that just need to start their own business. It's the mom who sells tamales at Christmas time for a little extra money. It's kind of a side hustle, but people have been telling her they're so good, she should make it her main thing. Or it's the victim of trafficking who was in it because she didn't have any other income source, who's learning about candle making and now knows how to make really premier candles and wants to make that her main business. Launch Central Valley utilizes the Urban Co-Starters curriculum, and we are now in our third cohort of starting this. You can take this class, 9 weeks, you're assigned a business mentor, and in 9 weeks go from 0 to operational with your own business permit. If you have an idea, we'll help you start it, iterate, pivot, do whatever you need to do. We just finished our third cohort. We've had 44 participants, and out of those 44, 28 have started their own little businesses. Some of them are already paying for their lives out of that business. We've got a bookkeeper, we've got a hairdresser, we've got somebody who started their own coffee shop, we've got someone who's starting a kind of a community market, etc. This is part of the ecosystem. Now, all of these things are tied together. We're utilizing business mentors for both the micro enterprise and the social enterprise. We're using people in churches, business coaches in churches to be allies in the Faith and Finances training system. And all of our networks are involved in this. This is not just the effort of one organization. It's better when you work together on it. So here's how all this then fits together for us. You have an orange pipeline and a green pipeline. Our orange pipeline is our social enterprise pipeline. And you can go to the Spark Tank. You can do SOENT, which is a business conference we do. You can go through one of our social business plan workshops. You can go through the Social Enterprise Academy, and all of those things lead to specific social problems being solved by sustainable means. And we believe that contributes to economic and social flourishing. And by the way, social flourishing is another word for shalom. Walter Brueggemann, well-known theologian, uses flourishing as his synonym for shalom. The green pipeline is the LMI pipeline. That's the low and moderate income micro enterprise pipeline. You can go through Launch Fresno or Launch Central Valley. You can take Faith and Finances. You can do Work Life, which is a workforce readiness training system that we do. And that leads to people's lives being repaired and improved through financial stability. And we believe that leads to economic and social flourishing. In all of these things, we practice mentoring, advocacy, and financial insight. We believe that leads to a healthy entrepreneurial ecosystem being established. We don't do this alone. The column on the right are many of the organizations and individuals that we're involved with. So I think the question for anybody on this webinar would be, what community problem do we want to solve in our city? Do we need to solve? One theologian uses this word, the vandalization of shalom. What does that mean? It means when you see clearly that things are not as they need to be, not as God intended, and that's jumping out to you as an issue that's reducing the shalom of your community. Or where there are good efforts, but they're just falling short. They're not moving the needle. Everybody has a great ministry and everybody has a great ministry story to tell, but are we moving the needle? Could there be another approach? There's an organization called Effectuation that talks about entrepreneurial method. And they have 4 principles that they'll refer to when discussing the entrepreneurial method. The first is called the bird in hand principle. This is simply what Elisha was doing with the woman when he asked, what do you have? This is a principle that says, if you want an entrepreneurial approach in your city, start with what you have. Start with the knowledge base that's already in your network. What do people already know how to do? Build on those things. A bird in the hand is better than 2 in the bush. Start with what you have already. What are the assets? Secondly, realize what you don't know and patch together the team that you need. You've seen these crazy quilts that take a section from somebody's jeans and a section from somebody's shirt and a section from somebody's blanket and a section from somebody's flag, and they cut pieces out and they sew them all together and make a crazy quilt. Well, Effectuation says, do that with your team. If you don't have business in your quiver, find somebody who does. Maybe you're all about networking and you can pull lots of people in, but you don't have the particular expertise. Find those who do and put them on your team. Thirdly, the affordable loss principle. Effectuation says, figure out what you can afford to lose in this, right? Without going bankrupt, without going under. Make that available. Have a plan. Be ready. You might lose it, but be okay with it. Make sure your elders are okay with it. Make sure your network's okay with losing it. Because if there's no risk, there's no reward. In fact, do you know how business people spell faith? R-I-S-K. And those of us who lead churches and faith-based organizations could learn a lot from that. There's one missionary story of a translator trying to translate the word faith in a culture that had no word for faith. And as he was translating the word, one of the indigenous people came in and plopped himself down in a happy-go-lucky way on a chair, just flopped right down. And so the word he chose for faith is to throw one's weight upon. It's an incredible insight. We need that in the church. We need to understand how risk equals faith and be able to risk things in an appropriate way. And then finally, the lemonade principle, and that just is, when it doesn't work, figure out what else you can do. Pivot, change, iterate, seek a new goal if you need to. I could spend a ton of time just talking about these, but I find them to be really helpful insights about how to create this ecosystem that we're trying to create in cities. So some additional reads, I mentioned The Profitable Charity by Minnick, Work of Our Hands, which is the book we put together as a team here in Fresno, The Social Entrepreneur by Danielson, and Economic Shalom by Bolt. These are just a few additional resources: Social Enterprise in a Global Context, the Role of Higher Education Institutions, and another one called Think Locally, Act Locally, Building a Robust Entrepreneurial Ecosystem by the Kauffman Foundation. I highly recommend that one. The Kauffman Foundation is really something. Look that one up if you can. So our business is impact in the name of Christ. This is Dave Clevenger. He leads the local mission here, and he decided he would just start businesses. This is a local rag business he started out of recycled clothes, started a recycling business. He's employing homeless men now, and now the man that came to get a job from him is leading one of the businesses. Really exciting to see. This is Alone. She loves a thrift store concept. She wants to help women in the Robinson neighborhood who never worked before learn how to work. So she started a thrift store. It's not your average thrift store. This thrift store is like a boutique. And you can see Alone has artistic skills here. This is such a beautiful window display that she put together for her thrift store. It's about her creativity and her love of the Robinson neighborhood residents who need jobs. This is about creating the ecosystem, and it may not be you, but it's I think a creative and innovative approach to accomplishing all the traditional ministry goals that we have in cities and things that are such at the heart of what BGU cares about: global urban leadership, transformation in the name of Christ. And these aren't meant to replace ministry methods. These are meant to build on those and as an alternative approach as well. I'll stop there, and we might have time for questions. I see it's 2 minutes. I didn't leave very much time, but please feel free to speak up about anything you saw.
But you have to unmute yourself if you're going to do that.
Randy, this is Ron. I'm kind of fascinated by each one of those things. And when you talk about not having entrepreneurial bones, that's me. I work a day and I collect my paycheck. And, I do that. I have been in ministry for so many years. But what is connecting with me is the school to prison pipeline, because I'm working both in the school district, and that's been an eye opener, seeing what real poverty is like with kids and how it affects them and the sources of anger that come from that and all the other things that flow out of that. And also working in the prison and seeing men, administering to men on a weekly basis, that they have fallen through the cracks in almost every possible way. And so the engagement that I have also with some mentoring of students, the engagement that I have with kids, and then seeing the prison, there's something that needs to be a hatchling in there of a way forward to affect, I'm thinking like in Schindler's List, you save one life. You if you can't do the big thing, which I can't, I can be active in 1 or 2 lives, which I'm doing, but something may be possible to be birthed within that. And it's kind of squishy and it's kind of invisible so far, but I really like the seed thought that is coming out of this. And I'm thinking of cul-de-sac, there's a number of people that are, they're really good, they're relatively, wealthy or at least stable financially, that due to a relational network, I could say, hey, could you do something this way and be willing to fund this? And I would be unabashed in saying, this is really for a good cause and you can afford it. So, but
that's
I don't
awesome,
know
Ron.
all the pieces put together.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And people in ministry, we have those networks. We know how to fundraise. Those are the talents we bring often. And it's fine not to be the one orchestrating this whole ecosystem either. Find yourself in it, right? Gather with others who are in it so you can talk about the dynamics of what's happening. I found that that's really important. But, sometimes there is a backbone organization that really takes initiative in all these areas. But cities are so complex that sometimes it takes more than one backbone organization. The real key is the ecosystem, and it's less important if that there be one person or one organization driving the ecosystem, and more important, that people see themselves as part of one and find their own little piece of that. So it's a little bit like the neighbor donating the jar of oil, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's good.
Are there other questions? Veda, you were unmuted for a moment. I didn't know if you had a question.
Yeah. So Randy, when I left Fresno in 2016, the word ecosystem was just ringing in my mind. It it was so amazing to see how each one of the organizations was feeding into the other and how that worked. So what happened was that I was planning to do this organizational model that would be sort of like a hybrid for profit, non-profit, kind of, both. And then I, because of a personal situation, ended up developing a community engagement triangle for uh, local government counselors. So now I'm at the point where okay, I would need something like 45,000 US dollars to run a project where I would train 53 people, and then those 53 people will impact 6,000 households, potentially impact 6,000 households. And it's going to, the shalom that we need to actually put into place is to have relationships built with the counselors and the people so that they could get their issues solved. One of them being an economic solution to, their particular issues. So recently I was talking to the Lord and saying, well, Marlene would probably understand my context because we we live in this really strongly polarized context where, I mean, it's the same in the US, but what's happening here is that a consultancy like mine has to sort of like curry favor with the government to be able to access the funding that I need to do this. All right. And so I haven't yet been able to see this kind of. I've been trying to connect to people, and doing this immersion recently connected me to like Joy, who was working with people in counseling, and Marcel, who is doing literacy and working with the Ministry of Education and so on. But we don't have a functional, I would say, ecosystem at this point. So, but I have a heart for that. I really see myself as a shalom catalyst, and so I'm at a point where I believe the Lord is saying to me, well, I actually got to see the minister after like about 3-4 months, and I saw him face to face a couple days ago. But I also got another idea, because if I'm to wait on the government to fund this, I don't have this the knowing that it will. I can pray through, I can trust God, I could listen to God, and I'm trying to do that. So I thought of working with 10 councils and doing training at a lower cost, and just lowering my whole shebang idea that I had, because my idea would have been like a three-tiered kind of project, and that would require a large sum of money. So I thought maybe I could just begin to get them interested in ABCD, get them to figure out how to vision plan. And just the other day at the ministers' meeting, I found out that somebody stole 8.5 million Guyana dollars from the NDC that I was researching. I came to this meeting because I'm like, Lord, I need some ideas. I need some sort of fix. I need to figure out how I move. So Randy, at one point I even thought I would ask you to be my mentor, because I have such a heart for Shalom. I've been able to connect with professors from the university here in Guyana. I've been able to connect with the public sector as well as the private sector a little bit. But the thing is, I really want to see Guyana move forward. And we've recently struck oil, and we have, I don't know how many millions of barrels that are being uh, shipped out, and we made a bad negotiation at the onset of it. But many people are thinking, oh, Guyana is going to be a Dubai, but we don't have the mechanisms, and we don't have the, I think, the national psyche for something like that to happen overnight, so to speak. So I'm just, so excited about this, Randy. Your thoughts, or anybody's thoughts, as I've shared my little story there.
I would say, I think you already know this, Vita, but you're entering a project that'll probably take the rest of your working life. So I would invest in the relational part, because it's that part that will grow with you. You have a network. You'll add to the network as you meet ministers and council persons and build trust, but you'll travel kind of as a cohort, over the next years. And the longer you travel with people of influence, the more they will hold on to you as a trustworthy person. I've worked with 3 mayors now. And what you begin to realize is, even for people of good conscience who are in positions of influence, the pressures on them are enormous, nefarious, pressures, but also just the confusion of conflicting information. And it's a difficult world. We're pretty hard on our politicians, and we should be. But politicians that are really trying to do the right thing have almost an impossible job. And so they have very few friends. They have a lot of people who want things from them, but very few friends. And so I would say my little contribution to you here would be, don't get discouraged if we're talking years, not months, and invest in relationships and build trust, because that will have a payoff down the road, especially if you are contributing things of value and building your own track record of deeds done, because that's very rare, and people notice that. So there's sort of the track record part and the relational part, and you end up waking up one day and you begin to see things flowing like you didn't think they were possible. That's what I've experienced. Not knowing how your system works, I couldn't advise you at all in anything more specific than that, but that's what I would say.
Thank you very much for your thoughts, Randy. Appreciate it.